stakeholders in developing and implementing NDCs in decision-making and action. Through the program, we will share approaches and good practice case studies to enhance communication and collaboration between government and non-party stakeholders. It is my honor to invite Your Highness Ms. Dr. Meshari Al-Saud, Chairman and co-founder of FACIL, to give high-level opening remarks. You're welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and those visiting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the first time. Welcome. Welcome to a nation renowned for its history and culture, and now leading the transformative action towards a brighter, sustainable future. As we convene on this significant occasion, it's our honor to host you here in Riyadh, where the legacy of tradition seamlessly fuses with modernity and innovation, and where our unwavering commitment to combating climate change is shaping our path ahead, with the Saudi Vision 2030, the Saudi Green Initiative, and the Middle East Green Initiative. Today, we stand at a crossroads, not just as a nation, but as global citizens, working in tandem to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time: climate change. In this endeavor, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia offers more than just words. We present a blueprint of action, from our vast desert, mountains, and seas to our vibrant cities and societies. Groundbreaking initiatives are taking root, highlighting our commitment to a sustainable, enduring future. Yet it is essential to recognize the challenges inherent in our journey. As an aspiring nation, as an aspiring developing nation, while echoing the sentiment of the broader MENA region, we are navigating a complex landscape. Our developmental aspirations are clear, yet we are acutely aware that merely relying on past strategies is insufficient. We are forging new paths, setting innovative standards that we hope will inspire others. This journey mandates an intricate dance of collaboration, drawing together governments, non-party stakeholders, and importantly, integrating the wider society. That's the very essence of our gathering here in Riyadh for the MENA Climate Week. We are here to collaboratively confront these challenges, inspire new ideas, and chart a sustainable course for all. Our discussions today centered on whole of society's approach to transformation aim to amplify the importance of an inclusive approach, one that instills a deep sense of ownership. This sentiment is crucial as we tackle the enormity of climate change. Collectively, we strive towards the ambitious goals laid out in the Saudi Green Initiative and Middle East Green Initiative, and as well the Paris Agreement. However, let's be clear, our path forward is characterized by continuous adaptation and learning. It's not just about understanding the NDC and its targets, but also the active participation in their formation. A practical, hands-on approach. In today's dialogue, enriched by the esteemed community representatives and experts in the upcoming panel discussions on voices from the region and the next round of NDCs, we will not only share and exchange knowledge on how to refine our climate pledges, but as well seek guidance from you, from everybody, to propel us in the desired direction. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like now to invite Mr. James Grabbard, Mitigation Director of the UNFCCC Secretariat, to give us some opening remarks. Thank you, James.
Your Highness, distinguished participants, thank you all for joining us today in the Track 4 event on Whole of Society's Approaches to Transformation, non-party stakeholders' role in implementing NDCs in the MENA region. This event is organized by the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia and the World Bank. I want to start by saying that the first global stocktake at COP28 is likely to reveal what we already know. The climate pledges and their implementation critically lag behind what is needed for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. The NDC synthesis report released in October of 2022 indicated that if implemented fully, current NDCs will by 2030 achieve only a 0.3% reduction below 2019 levels, which is only a fraction of what is required. To further ambition and implementation, party and non-party stakeholders such as the private sector, civil society, youth, municipalities, and others all need to work together, specifically when looking towards the second round of NDCs due by 2025. The recently published Global Stocktake Synthesis report stated that policies and measures that promote climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emission development can be made mutually supportive through whole-of-society approaches and integrated inclusive policy making. In that regard, this session at the MENA Climate Week aims to bring together government representatives and non-party stakeholders. The aim is to anchor the crucial role of non-state actors in designing and implementing NDCs. A multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach would only enhance the effectiveness of NDCs. Therefore, it is important to understand that individual and collective action is needed to bring about the desired change. So we encourage you to share examples from the region. What are the best practices? And what are the challenges that need to be overcome? The Secretary is and will continue to facilitate this process to collectively achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. I wish you a conducive and fruitful interaction today that leads to enhanced collaborative climate solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Let us now open the floor to the first panel on something that I want to show you. Okay. On participatory approaches to NDC design and implementation. Let me invite to join the stage again, Your Highness, Dr. Mishrahi Al Saud, please. Haya Asir, Global Council on SDG 13, Climate Action Youth Representative. And Leon Diaz-Bonet, Chief Secretary General's Office from ICLEI, Local Government for Sustainability. And to guide this discussion, I would like us to welcome Rafif Abdel Razak, Program Leader for Sustainable Development from the World Bank.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As our opening speakers highlighted, we're here to discuss all the different whole-of-society approaches we can take to address the NDCs. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the NDCs, we have a lot of youth and a lot of different people attending Climate Week. Let's just step back a bit and highlight that an NDC is a climate action plan to cut emissions and adapt climate impacts. And it's clear from what we've been hearing, what we're seeing, and the current state of the world that it can't be done from just one side. So I'm very excited to have these panelists with us to highlight how it can be done from both civil society, the youth, as well as from the perspective of cities. So with us today, we have His Highness Dr. Mashari Al Saud, Chairman and co-founder of FASIL. We also have with us Ms. Haya Asir, Global Council on SDGs, Climate Action Youth Representative, and Mr. Leon Diaz-Bonet, Chief Secretary General's Office, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. So I will start with the same question for everyone, but I'd like them to give it to us, share their perspectives from their respective areas of expertise. So I'll start with you, Dr. Mashadi. What are the current challenges and best practices you have seen in ensuring a whole-of-society approach to designing and implementing NDCs in the MENA region, and from the perspective of civil society and your organization?
Thank you very much, Rafif, for this introduction and giving us the space to share our perspectives. If you allow me first, I'll just give a brief about our organization, which is FACIL. FACIL is a non-profit organization focuses on social and community enablement towards environmental sustainability. So we really act as a platform that enables the community through 4 pillars. One is raising awareness. Second is capacity building, impactful networking, and developing knowledge bases. When it comes with regards to our perspective as a civil society organization representing the community in the shaping the NDCs from a community perspective, we actually are capitalizing on the impactful networking element of that 4 pillars. And we've seen the most impact reflected to whether the recommendations that we provided through the processes, through the impactful networking that we're conducting. Within the MENA region, there are certain opportunities that can be used as platforms. We have the LCOI, the Local Conference on Youth. We in FACIL became partner in establishing that process internally, where we engage the community, bringing the voice of the Saudi community that are sometimes underheard or underrepresented in global platforms. So we took that pledge of becoming a channel for the Saudi community and youth to global platforms. We started this few years ago through our partnerships with the, for example, UN agencies, being like FACIL being a UNEP accredited NGO. This gave us an access to a huge network of intergovernmental agencies, and as well non-profit organizations around the world, and specifically in the MENA region. We've been interacting with civil society organizations in the United Arab Emirates, in Jordan, in Egypt, and sharing our views with collective actions and writing up our recommendations to that process. So these are some of the opportunities, yet there are some challenges. The challenges are at different levels. There are organizational challenges as a non-profit organization trying to find its path and creating its impact. And I think this challenge is a global in its sense, not specific to the Saudi community. But again, there was some challenges in the governance of the third sector within the kingdom. But now this is being revamped and even are ahead of us for us to keep up with such a process. And then there are challenges related to credibility. As a youth-led organization, we sometimes face this issue that we are not as credible in terms of bringing our voices to the to shaping and designing policies. And a third challenge relates to the community and the level of awareness. So we took also the pledge of connecting with our network and partners here in Saudi, like the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Environment, the National Center for Environmental Compliance, and the UN intergovernmental agencies and its subsidiaries to actually provide toolkits and awareness session for the community, and to have this amplified impact where we also mandate whoever is participating with us and engaging with us to actually train and become a channel for us in the community. And one last thing is the utilization of university clubs. We found huge impact and reach when we engaged and helped establish few environmental and climate-related university clubs around the Saudi universities. They became a network, a part of our network and part of our channels to reach the community. So this is a quick reflection. I hope I did not take much time from...
No, not at all. Very interesting. And I think you've already given us some very good examples from the kingdom that I think can be used across the region, and probably are. And you've already noted quite a bit the collaboration with youth and also collaboration with the UAE. So I would like to hand it over to Hayat to please give us your perspective on your current challenges and the best practices for a whole society approach in the NDCs.
Thank you, Rafif. It's a pleasure to be with you all here, and it's an honor and a huge responsibility to be representing an entire sector in the non-party stakeholders in essence. But just to zoom a bit back or take a step back, I always like to start to give an overview of the region and youth in particular. The average median age for the globe is 28 years old. The average median age for the MENA region is 22. This makes the MENA region one of the youngest regions in the world. The youth under the age of 35 contribute more than 60% of the population in the MENA region. Why am I saying these facts? If we are to leave youth out of the conversation, if we don't give them the platforms, then we are missing on more than half of the society. And this is where the importance of involving youth stems from. Maybe on a global level, but on a MENA regional level in specific. I want to give a few examples of best practices that I have personally witnessed in the UAE, and then maybe share a bit more on the region and the challenges. I work in an NGO. We aim at raising capacities for youth in regards to different areas, and especially climate change and sustainability. And 2 years ago, I received a call from a governmental institution, and they asked me, we are submitting our next update for the UAE NDC, and we would like youth to review and help us give feedback in essence. And mind you, I am not a governmental employee. So yes, I had to sign the needed NDAs to be a part of that working group, but I was invited to the kitchen, not only to the party, but to dance center stage in the party. So this is the first approach by which I thought the involvement of youth was very helpful. The second way we were involved is at the NGO I work at, we have founded the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change, and this is a council where youth from the MENA region are leading different projects and initiatives on climate change and sustainability. And we do this as a youth-led initiative. It's voluntarily. We try our best to make things work with different stakeholders. And you know, things with youth-led initiatives, it gets really, really tricky and hard. But to my surprise, if you go to the third update of the second NDC of the UAE, you'll find a whole chapter, paragraph in essence, about the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change. And this does two things to me as a young person who's trying to support. The first is it makes me feel like my initiative and my work is seen, it's taken seriously, and it's actually recognized by the government. And the second thing is it reinforces and reassures me that all these efforts are actually contributing to the larger efforts of the country itself. So I am not a standalone initiative. I'm not doing things out of the loop, but yet I am contributing to the future of the country, and that motivates me to work harder. So these are two ways by which, or best practices by which I myself was involved in the draft and review of the UAE's NDC. But this is not only in the UAE. There are many examples in the MENA region where youth were involved. For example, there is an initiative that was led UAE, Jordan, and Qatar, where they involved youth in a workshop to develop their national adaptation plans. So these are not costly. It just requires that we try to institutionalize these kind of workshops and of consultations, and maybe we can address that later. To tap into the challenges, I know I took a lot of time too, but to tap into the challenges, I think Your Highness mentioned something that's very important, which is credibility, especially when it comes from youth. I know we don't have much expertise, but still, we are the future, we're the leaders of the future, and we're trying as much as possible to be up to date with everything and be educated. So you cannot just miss on that because of lack of credibility. And lack of platforms too. There are initiatives and there are efforts, but there has to be institutionalized platforms where youth are able to contribute seriously.
Thank you very much. That's it's always good to understand where sometimes we don't see there are avenues for youth to come in, and we need to keep that and be very vigilant. And unfortunately, I can't associate with the youth anymore, but I can associate with cities as an urban planner. So I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Leon to give us the perspective from the cities and how cities there are avenues and challenges, as well as challenges for bringing a whole of society approach to NDCs.
Try again.
Hello? Can you hear me? Ah,
yeah.
Okay. I couldn't hear myself, but if you can hear me, that's okay. Thank you very much, Rafif. And it's interesting to be on this panel because, of course, on this UN logic, cities are non-party stakeholders, but essentially they're still forms of government. So that maybe distinguishes the constituency I'm representing on this panel to the constituencies that my two previous speakers were referring to, because yeah, they are governments, but they are not the national government, and I think that's kind of the perspective we're trying to bring. Maybe I should introduce first ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a global network of more than 2,500 cities and regions that are all committed to sustainable urban development, and we're active in more than 125 countries, including some in the MENA region, although a bit weaker maybe than in other geographies. In the UNFCCC process, we act as the focal point of the local governments and municipal authorities observer constituencies, where as a big group of, I think, around 30 partners with other city networks and other urban and subnational stakeholders, we're trying to really advocate for the principle of multi-level governance to ensure that climate action and adaptation measures are coordinated extremely well across all levels of government to ensure that the technical and financial capacities and resources are channeled to the level where they're needed to effectively implement action on the ground. ICLE was the first associate member of the NDC partnership. And we're trying to work through that to support national governments in formulating their NDCs, especially keeping in mind the urban components of said NDCs. And why do we do that? And we're talking about the whole of society approach. I think that's because we believe that cities are the ones that are the closest to their citizens. They are the ones that really have kind of a tap into the sentiments on the ground on what are the current needs and challenges that are felt by the citizens that really need to be addressed and that translated into these national plans. And of course, that's quite critical because, the majority of emissions originate in cities, and also most of energy is consumed in urban areas. Now, if we've been asked to focus a bit on the MENA region in this panel, which I think is very relevant, and I wanted to say that there's 6 countries, I think, in the MENA region that are already part of the NDC partnership. But when you look at, in preparation of this panel, we looked at some of the NDCs that have been submitted from the MENA region, and I think it's quite heterogeneous when it comes to the urban components. So you have some submissions that are overall 10 pages long, I think. Sorry, I looked at the English version. I don't know if the Arabic version might be more extensive, but there's no reference at all to urban components. But I think there are also some really strong examples, for example, from the UAE, where for all major sectors they include emirate policies or emirate policy levels. So really trying to localize or contextualize a lot of the action that is being put forward in the NDCs. And a little bit of a pattern that you can see is that some of these NDCs, they try to focus on the mass transit systems in their capitals. So Egypt, Jordan, and the Saudi submission, they all see kind of implementing these mass capacity transport systems as one avenue of increasing their ambition. And I think we've seen that in Riyadh here, where they are really launching the different 6 metro lines over just a short period of a few months. And it's quite exciting to see how this is going to be picked up and where this will go. Hopefully. So very happy to follow that process. I'm talking now mostly about the structure of NDCs, not so much about the level of ambition, but of course we hope that by not only kind of asking subnational governments to localize NDCs if there's an urban component from the national government level, but also if the subnational government levels are being consulted in the NDC formulation, so they can directly submit their needs, but also inform the national government of their action. We've seen that quite strongly in other regions of the world, for example in Japan, where there have been hundreds of cities that have unilaterally taken action and declaring an ambitious climate action target, and that has informed then the national government, and without much effort the national government could actually increase the ambition at the national level. So we're hoping that this is a two-way street, that not only national plans kind of need to be implemented at the local level, but that the local level can actually inform the national NDC. I think I come to a stop here because we have more questions coming up.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on some of the challenges you think, if you see any specifically in MENA.
I think the challenges could be that, I mean, it's very heterogeneous. So in some contexts, I think we would just be very happy to see the uptake of urban components in the NDCs. But for other contexts, it's a bit more nuanced. I think some of the NDCs that have a good focus on urban components, they tend to focus then on the big cities, the capitals of the world, which admittedly they have a large footprint, and it's a key ground to address them. But I think what we would wish to see is that also the smaller and medium-sized cities find a little bit more consideration. There's some NDCs, like the one from Jordan, that is already kind of considerate of this, but other NDCs in the region, maybe we would like to see more consideration also of the small and medium-sized cities.
I think you've all highlighted similar challenges where we just need to hopefully ensure that national governments and governments are bringing in and creating avenues and platforms for all the different stakeholders to come in, and not just maybe the leading ones. Okay, my next question for everyone is sticking to the region. So what are your regional considerations that need to be taken into account to define and adopt a whole of society approach for the next round of the NDCs? And you've already highlighted on some of that, that these avenues need to be created. But what other potential interventions you see, whether it's within the economy or is it technical capacity or financial considerations that would enable more involvement in the next round? Dr. Mashadi, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Well, all of the above plus some other.
We'd love to hear more.
But I would, I mean, the involvement of the community is still not well represented. There are more needs to be happen, and it's a two-way kind of thing. You know, there is a responsibility for the community to come forward and to actually bring their voice, because sometimes it's easy to blame institutions. It's easy to note that there are lack of platforms, but sometimes the platform are triggered and created by the community themselves. So and I've been sitting. I went around some private sector, government as well, and believe me, some people when they are working day on day, busy doing their work, sometimes they tend to deviate from more comprehensive approach. So we need more of a collective approach into this. The community should come forward. The governmental agencies and other players in the private sector and intergovernmental entities should open their doors to allow for the creation of platforms and provide also opportunities for enablement, whether it's technical, financial, and so on. And the example Haya mentioned with regards to being involved in such working groups and you know, bringing your voice, the community's voice in that as well is a great example. But again, maybe I'll take a step back and reflect on something that is, you know, a bit related to this question, which is a proper representation of the community's need. Sometimes we tend to look into the, for example, environmental impact or the climate the dimension of it, but tend to forget the economic and social parameters of this holistic approach. And this where the community should come forward and present. And being in Saudi Arabia, and a country that might have been blamed for some, you know, blames with regards to the contribution to the climate. However, this is yani, the things that the government and the community have collaborate on with new approaches and innovative initiatives that tackles the climate challenges in a more progressive way without hindering economic you know, advantages that the country is standing on, but at the same time providing more of a holistic approach that stands on innovation, on creative initiatives to solve these challenges. I hope I reflected to your question
very much
appropriately.
Haya, let's go over to you.
Sure. So I think we put a lot of emphasis and pressure on governments to provide platforms and provide areas where non-party stakeholders can contribute. But there also, we should also put effort and pressure on the non-party stakeholders to involve themselves. So allow me to tackle both. I'm going to give a few examples on top-down approaches that we can work together on, or bottom-up approaches that non-party stakeholders should work on themselves. So to start with the top-down approaches, I think the example I mentioned on consultations and engagements is very important, and it cannot be randomized. It has to be institutionalized in the drafting and designing of the NDC itself, and to include all various groups under the larger title of non-party stakeholders. The second one is, and just because I'm biased to youth, I'm mentioning this, we cannot always involve youth with an observer badge or a tokenized badge. How can we increase youth representations not as observer or non-party delegate, but actually as a party delegate? How can we involve their voices in the actual delegations that are representing our countries? The third point I would like to mention from the top-down approach is I would kindly ask governments to do a stakeholder mapping exercise and find what are the youth-led initiatives in their countries that are actually contributing to their NDCs. Marginalizing these efforts is a waste or a lose-lose scenario where the youth are not getting the recognition and the country is not benefiting from these initiatives and projects that are being conducted. So these are the three points from a top-down approach. If we look at the other approach, which is a more bottom-up approach, I would like to urge non-party stakeholders to first do their own advocacy plans. If you want your voices to be heard, they have to be aligned, they have to be formalized, they have to be formed in the universal language of policy recommendations, of advocacy plans. And I know this is very new to our region, but not in the format that is localized. So we do have our own forms of advocacy plans, of recommendations that are being drafted by youth and other non-party stakeholders. The second point is I would urge youth to share knowledge. I would urge civil society groups to share their knowledge. Your Highness, you mentioned raising awareness. I think this is very important, and it would be more beneficial if we don't wait for the governments to actually create these educational plans or awareness-raising plans, but do our share of the knowledge-sharing part. And the third point I would like to mention is participation in these dialogues. Let's say our governments did their share of the work, and they're doing these consultations with non-party stakeholders. It would be very unfortunate if the governments are putting down their share of the work, and then we don't show up and we don't actively participate and actively engage in these approaches. So these are two different approaches, whether it's top-down or bottom-up, that can be implemented.
Thank you very much. I think you've given us all homework, which I think we should all take forward. And I hope the municipal government level was listening, right? But Leon, why don't you give us your perspective on regional considerations for improving the whole of society approach in the next round of NDCs?
Sure. Yeah, no, the municipal government needs to pay very close attention. And we, as ICLE, we have a partnership with Jungo, the Observer Constituency for the Youth, on a very specific initiative for this. So you're all aware the Global Stocktake is ongoing, and that's an exercise that's at the national level, but we're actively incentivizing municipalities all around the world to conduct local stocktake exercises in their own city halls, where they really bring together the citizens and key stakeholder groups, including the youth, for a joint exercise of really taking stock. Where are we? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? So a very kind of participatory approach, and we're partnering with Jungo to integrate that with the ELCOIs that were mentioned by His Highness, and also, yeah, to encourage sorry, I lost my thought. To encourage kind of these local stock takes to inform then the national exercises and also the formulation of national ambitions. Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yes, so we're looking for, in the next round, what different considerations. So I think you echoed very well what Haya was saying about stock taking and a stakeholder mapping type of exercise. Anything else you see that you would like to see in the next round, whether it's capacity building or financial considerations?
Yeah, I think well, it's a bit what I said in my earlier statement about the inclusion of more urban actions in the NDCs, also when it comes to small and medium-sized cities. And I think one challenge and why that's potentially not included yet is that, of course, the large BRT project in Amman, the metro in Riyadh, the metro in Cairo, they're all large-scale infrastructure projects that you can actually quite easily include in your section on means of implementation, because it's easy to put a cost at that because it's a very large project, it's economically interesting. You can very well quantify the needs in terms of capacity and financial resources. And small and medium-sized cities do not necessarily have that. They normally have ideas, very good and concrete ideas of what it is that they need to advance with their own climate action in their jurisdiction, but they sometimes don't have among their staff the necessary technical capacity on how to formulate that into a very concrete project. Or the projects have very small volumes and they need to kind of be aggregated to be financially interesting for a financing institution to take it up. And that's something we're also trying to support national governments with, to build capacity in local in municipalities with staff to really elevate projects from the idea to the bankability stage. There's a lot of these project pipelines, project preparation facilities around. And maybe that is something that we can strive to include in upcoming NDCs as well.
Great. Well, I have many more questions, but I'd like to see if maybe the audience would like to come in, if there's any questions maybe you weren't prepared to ask questions, but this is your chance. I see a hand raised. I don't know if we have a mic we can share. Maybe. Where's our sound person? I see the mic coming over to you.
Very much. Okay, thank you very much for the participation approach that you designed when you implemented the NDC approach. But our MENA region is suffering from the lack of the participation of the citizens, especially when we speak or need to discuss the environmental issues. Most of the practical and experience of the community participation approach come ready under the project, especially the projects come from the EU funded or an UNEP or somewhere. So, and most of the, and my question is for Dr. Mashari as a civil society co-founder and chairman of the organization FACIL, do you have designed approach specific for the community and the local community in Saudi Arabia, or you work with the familiar approach that we already work with in Libya, for example, because I'm from Libya, for a community meeting, something like that, on platform. Do you have a local approach you implemented because we familiar with some issues, we're familiar with some habits and the cultures?
Thank you very much for your question. And is this your first time in Saudi or? حياك الله. For us, yeah, it's a very important question, and you mentioned something about there is a lack for the civil society engagement in designing and shaping international policies that reflects to their own interest. When we started in FACIL, we started to look at the social structure. We started to analyze what are the most appropriate channel to reach out to the community and to have the best feedback from the community, but as well the appropriate methods to reach out to governmental entities. And that analysis took some time for us to engage. But we were privileged. This is a hard word that I always struggle to say. We're privileged that one time a government entity approached us seeking our input when they went to, for example, some international policy design forum, where they found the huge influence of NGOs in that forum. So they said, will you be able to actively engage? And that was on a specific treaty that we were working on. So that was our first kickstart engagement when it comes to international policy design. We've established a forum, an open channel, both virtual and physical, for the community to engage. We were reaching out to different community segments, university students, even to some scholars, Islamic scholars, where they can convey some of the messages in, for example, Jum'ah prayers and so on. And that's the element when I said we need to understand the social structure and the trust hierarchy of each community segment. Saudi Arabia is a very diverse country with many cities and many social cultures within Saudi Arabia. We had to analyze the most appropriate way to reach out to that community segment. And then we started to have more of a dominoes effect. You know, when people started to realize what is FACIL, we started to build a little bit of credibility. And then we were engaging with channels that allow for civil society organization engagement. We went, for example, to the G20 process. Saudi Arabia is a G20 country. There is a G20 process, and there are the engagement groups with the G20. There is a specific group called the Civil 20, and we were part of that as well in the Climate, Energy, and Sustainability Working Group, drafting and pushing for some recommendations, taking the input from the whole society. As much as we could, definitely. There is limits, but we aggregated this collective view on certain issues, And we've advocated for it, communicated it to the process. We presented about 20 policy recommendations. 11 of them were adopted as is by word in the C20 policy pack that was endorsed by the G20, reflecting our needs, our local needs. When I'm talking about our, I mean about the region's need, because we share similar requirement of economic developmental needs and so on. Sorry, I took a little bit long reflecting to this question, but I hope I answered yours.
Really very interesting points, and I'd like to emphasize again your analysis or your suggestion to understand all the different segments of society and then the best way to reach them. Hey, maybe you can say a bit about what you've seen has worked well on how to engage youth. I mean, maybe sometimes we're outdated. Should we be using Snapchat or TikTok? What's the best approach that you've seen to bring in youth to this discussion?
ChatGPT. So first of all, what are the best practices in bringing youth is understanding the needs of youth. This is the first part, and understanding the importance of youth involvement. If we are using that, or if it's not only for youth, but for any other non-party stakeholders, it's not a tokenism move. It should be an actual involvement and an actual taking their opinions and their voices into consideration. I want to mention maybe an example of what we are doing on the road to COP28, and that is making sure that the youth are leading. When I mentioned earlier that we should not wait, we should lead, and this is something that we're doing with the Conference of Youth COI that's leading up to COP28. So a lot of you maybe have heard of COP, but not of COI. And COI is the Conference of Youth that precedes COP every single year for the past 18 iterations. And it's hosted usually in the same country that hosts COP. The main outcome of COI itself is the Global Youth Statement. And the Global Youth Statement is a policy recommendation paper, and it capitalizes on voices from youth from more than 110 countries all over the world. So this is a huge scope of work, and it took thousands of volunteering working hours from youth from different parts of the globe to come together and compile this policy recommendation paper. Because youth do understand that if they want to be heard, then they have to submit something that speaks the same language as the decision makers. So this is part of what we are doing as youth to make sure that we are represented well, and we are contributing to the decision-making table. And allow me to take this chance to ask all the parties or stakeholders or private sector or public sector or non-governmentals or non-profits to make sure to try to support these youth-led initiatives, whether it's the Global COI that's going to take place on November 26th, 7th, and 8th in Dubai, or if it's the regional COIs, or if they are the local COIs that are happening in each one of the countries. Try to reach out and find these youth-led initiatives because they do need the support. I answered your question.
Great, yes. Leon, maybe if you have seen from the municipal side recommendations or best practices that at the city level or at the town level even that can bring in participation from the community.
Yeah, I mean, there's different formats, but I think generally it's really important to leverage the insights of the residents, because I mean, you and I understand we're the urban planners on this panel, so maybe we have some fancy concepts that we can throw around, and depending on the design background, we can even make some fancy renderings of how the city of the future might look like. I can't do that. I don't know if you have those skills, but each of us who lives in cities, we're like local experts. We know our district, we know our neighborhood, we know the people that make it up, and these are like people form part of the infrastructure of cities. So it's critical that each major project is kind of discussed with the residents of the neighborhood, and that can include also then the different perspectives, be it a youth who might need to ask, like, how can I spend my free time in this? Or someone who just has to go about their daily lives, doing care work, doing groceries, going to work, all these things. And it really depends on the project, but I think it's key that you communicate extremely well what you want to achieve as a municipal government with a certain intervention, how you're going to go about it, how you can design it. There are some municipalities also like to work with pilot projects where they say, like, look, we want to test together with you as a community a certain measure, but it's going to have first a limited duration, so that you can all kind of adapt to it, see how you feel, provide us with feedback, and in some cases they even have very hard KPIs that are kind of communicated in advance, that the success of this pilot project is then measured against. So that at the end of the day, it's not, again, a political decision, but it's really like, look, we closed down one lane of traffic and we wanted to open it for bicycles. And we say in advance, if the traffic with the cars is not more than 5 minutes delayed in the same period 1 year after, then we are going to make it permanent. And I think that's a very clear communication, because it kind of tries to take out all the sentiments of like, oh, but I need my car and I need to drive with it on this road, and the fears, am I still going to be able to get where I need to go in time? Like some of these, like, very good communication, ensuring it's on all platforms. Yeah, that's kind of some of the approaches.
Great, thank you. And I think it links back to what Dr. Mashadi was saying about knowing your community and knowing all the different segments and how to reach them. So we have basically a minute left, and I just want to see if there's any last thoughts any of our panelists would like to share, whether it's in the run-up to COP28, as Haya already highlighted, but of really where we want to see the NDCs going. Anything you'd like to add?
We've heard your name in the middle, so that's why.
She started the discussion onto COP, so maybe we should see if there's anything you'd like to see in the run-up to COP.
Maybe last thing I would mention, and this is something that I've already highlighted, but just to reiterate, in Arabic we have a proverb that says اليد الواحدة لا تصفق, which translates into one hand cannot clap by itself. So I think in the lead up to not only COP28, but all the COPs that are to come, we should make sure to put hands in hands together with whether it's non-party stakeholders, whether it's governments or any other, I don't know if there's any other non-party or party, that's it. But just to conclude, make sure that you are capitalizing on these partnerships and on these alliances for the greater good.
Great. Any last thoughts?
Yeah.
Well, my last thoughts are a transition to the next panel, so I don't know if you want to take the stage first.
Well, again, reiterating on like the points that Haya mentioned, and again, reflecting on the that there are two approaches, bottom-up and top-down approaches. Again, I think we're fully aligned. Know your community. Sometimes it's your responsibility to establish the process. Sometimes you have to educate the governmental or the counterparts for these establishing these specific platforms or opportunities for better engagement and more social representation.
Great, thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists today, Dr. Mashadi, Ms. Haya, and Leon. And we look forward to the next panel.
Thanks to you, Rafif.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. We have another panel now on a very crucial topic. So if you feel like stretching, please feel free to stand up, but don't leave the room. So after this very enlightening and inspiring panel, I will now give the time for our next panel of speakers. We're going to talk about a crucial topic on next round of NDCs, guidance for non-party stakeholders. So I will kindly ask to join us here in the stage, Ms. Jennifer Kinney-Austin, Director of Policy and Strategy, Climate Champions Team. Thank you, Jennifer. and Leah Ranalder from UN Habitat. And we also have 2 more speakers virtually. We have Harika Masund from the World Bank and Jasmine Blessing from the UNDP. And to moderate this session and last part of our program, I invite Mary Awad Menasa, Senior Climate Action Specialist at the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia. Mary, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. I hope you can hear me. Thanks, everyone. And I would like to start first by thanking the first panel for excellent interventions and really setting the stage for this conversation. I just want to highlight maybe a few observations from this discussion. There's a lot of, it seems, horizontal and vertical elements to non-party stakeholder engagement in NDCs. Looking at it from government down to non-party stakeholder, but also everybody mentioned this bottom-up approach, voicing concerns, voicing priorities. But what I also noticed is that the same non-party stakeholder groups in different countries in the MENA regions are talking to each other. The private sector across the region is mobilizing and learning from each other, as well as youth, as we have seen, and I think that's a very encouraging point. So this panel, which focuses on guidances for non-party stakeholders, is not only for non-party stakeholders, but also for governments to consult and to understand how institutional arrangements and how best practices can enhance their non-party stakeholders in their different countries to engage in the NDC process. So we have a very distinguished panel here with us today from UNDP, UN Habitat, the World Bank, and the Climate Champions. And I would like to first give the floor to Jasmine to give us a few insights on how can gender be mainstream in NDC and what does that mean for the different non-party stakeholder groups, but also the different governments. Jasmine, if you can hear me, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. I have prepared a PowerPoint, so just wanted to kindly ask to pull up the presentation if possible.
Sure, I think that... I think we need to switch to the presentation again. If we can please switch. Thank you. Yes, perfect. Please go ahead, Jasmine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If you could go to the second slide, that would be great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I would like to start with a little bit of background. I'm going to share some good practices in ensuring a gender approach in NDC as part of the Climate Promise program. And in case that you're not familiar with the program, the Climate Promise is actually the largest offer of support for countries to enhance NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And currently it's active in 127 countries and helps countries to reduce emissions and increase resilience. And in the MENA region, Climate Promise currently supports 7 countries. And really importantly, gender integration is a key element for all countries that have projects under the Climate Promise. Next slide, please. The one before, if possible. Thank you, perfect. So as you can see on the slide, there has been a positive increase with regards to gender integration in many of the key areas when you compare the first round of NDCs with the second one. And 95% of countries that have submitted the updated NDC have included references to women's empowerment and gender equality compared to 46% in the first round. And we also see a sharp increase of countries mentioning women at the sectoral level as compared to the first round. Next slide, please. And in the MENA region, we can also see that enhanced NDCs are actually more inclusive than in the first round. So we've seen some positive signs of change. For example, Iraq's NDC mentions supporting rural women through the use of modern technologies. Jordan's NDC recommends strengthening the role of women in renewable energies. And Tunisia's NDC emphasizes women's access to training and skills. Lastly, Somalia's NDC highlights that women can also be agents of change and play a key role in mitigation. And also really important to say that UNDP promoted that gender and displacement will be included in Somalia's updated NDC. Next slide, please. So now a quick snapshot of 3 countries in the MENA region. In Lebanon, a UNDP partnered with the Ministry of Environment to enhance gender responsiveness in Lebanon's NDC. And a gender analysis revealed women's not only limited participation in decision-making and consultations. So since then, the Lebanese government has committed to ensure a gender approach in NDCs in future updates. And really a great achievement has been that the National Council of Lebanese Women now sits on the National Committee overseeing NDC implementation and approvals. Next slide, please. And in Jordan, we are currently collaborating with the Ministry of Environment, specifically focusing on making the transport sector greener and more inclusive for women and for people with disabilities. And so while we've been assessing opportunities for both for women and for youth, we have identified significant potential in the transport sector for job creation, particularly for women. So our project is enhancing technical skills and providing them with green jobs. Next slide, please. And in Somalia and Sudan, climate promise initiatives have been significantly assisting with the respective governments, often led by the Ministry of Environment, ensuring the active participation of women and also of displaced women in NDC consultations and updates. Next slide, please. So now, despite the good practices we've just seen, I wanted to say that there's still some challenges when it comes to integrating gender into climate action. So one big issue is the lack of gender-specific data on climate impacts. And without its data, it's really hard to address gender-specific needs in our climate plans. Secondly, many countries don't have the know-how how to integrate gender into their climate policies, missing out on the potential of women in climate action. Third, gender inequalities in decision-making often still exclude women's perspectives in climate policies. And often there's simply not enough funds allocated for gender-responsive climate actions, which can slow down progress. And lastly, like proper systems for tracking gender integration progress are often underdeveloped. Next slide, please. So based on our experience in the region, we at UNDP believe that we should focus on different key strategies to kind of more impactfully integrate gender in the third round of NDCs. So firstly, actively involving civil society, especially women's groups in NDC development, implementation, and monitoring. Also really important to collect and analyze gender disaggregated data on climate impacts to understand specific vulnerabilities and contributions of men and women. Third, sometimes gender is a little sidelined, so integrating gender considerations across all aspects of climate policy and planning is critical. And lastly, investing in capacity building programs to enhance knowledge not only of policymakers and CSOs, but for everyone on gender and climate change is really critical. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. And NDC, as mentioned before, should allocate sufficient funds for gender-responsive climate actions, covering capacity building, technology transfer, and adaptation. And yes, as mentioned before, promoting a gender balance and inclusivity in decision-making, really making sure that all the diverse perspectives are considered is important. And lastly, robust mechanisms should be developed to track gender integration within NDCs, ensuring transparency and accountabilities. Sorry. Last slide, please. So no, I know this has been like a lot of information in a snapshot, so I've pasted my email on the screen because unfortunately I couldn't be there in person, but happy to respond any additional questions. Thank you.
If you're hearing us, Jasmine, we're applauding you. Thank you so much for
okay, great. I can't hear you, but good to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think one of the first very visible things are the very positive indicators of the progress of integration of gender in NDCs from 2015 until now. I think the progress is promising. That, I think, means that there are more capacities in understanding what this mainstreaming is and how useful it is for the implementation of the NDCs. But we also do know these challenges, and of course, all of this is an iterative process, including non-party stakeholder in policy making. Climate commitments is an iterative methodology, but it seems that we are going in the right direction in the region. At least it's very encouraging to see also those mentions of gender and women and the different NDCs in the region. So thank you so much, Jasmine. I would now like to turn to Jen from the Climate Champions to talk about the same perspective from not only private sector, maybe all non-party stakeholders, but if you could also focus on how can the private sector engage in the NDC and how can governments enhance how they include also the private sector. So what does the NDC mean for companies? Over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to our hosts and to fellow panelists, and yeah, really interesting and promising, as you said, to see those gender statistics and already some good progress on that front. A pleasure to be here on this well-gendered panel as well. So I'm Jen Austin. I'm with the Climate Champions team, meaning that I work for the high-level champions for climate action. And just briefly what that is, and then I'll talk about the businesses in the NDCs. So each year, the country that's hosting the COP appoints someone to be the high-level champion for climate action. This year for COP28, it's Her Excellency Rassan Al Mubarak. Last year for COP27, it was Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin. And so that position was actually created from this very same insight of created in Paris once the Paris Agreement, or as the Paris Agreement was being decided and concluded. It was realized then that as we move into a phase of implementation, the negotiations are important and the intergovernmental process is super important. And in order to move forward with implementation and achievement of all of the goals that have been set, that we need a whole of society approach. And so that is at the core of the Climate Champions' work, and their mandate is to work with non-party stakeholders, which again in UN language means not the governments, or not the national governments, as the city governments mentioned earlier. They are governments, but considered non-party stakeholders in this case. And so that means businesses of all sizes, cities, states, regions, investors, civil society, youth, indigenous peoples, academics, sort of the whole spectrum of folks who are out there in the real world working to get these things done. And so as we're talking about, first of all, why? Well, so we work with those full range of actors. Because of who I'm joined with on this panel, I was asked to speak a bit more about the business perspective. And so first of all, why do businesses care about NDCs? What are NDCs and what would they mean to a business? Meaning, why would they be motivated to be involved? And for one, the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, are the targets that countries put forward. And as the name implies, the countries get to determine for themselves what those are going to look like and what they're going to include. And so from a business point of view, there's a real opportunity to help inform what it is that would be useful for you as a business to help you make better decisions, to help you know which way things are going to be going. And that essentially, there's a lot of, as we're working to achieve our 2050 goals and our goals this decade, there's huge amounts of action that need to be taken by a whole variety of actors, whether you're going to be buying zero carbon products or producing zero carbon products or investing in zero carbon products or utilizing them at home or using them in your school or in your house or in your car. And right now we're at a place where we don't have everything that we need. When you go to the store, you don't see enough zero carbon products, and when people are making investments, they're not sure which to invest in. And so basically the more clarity there is about where we need to go collectively, not only to net zero by 2050, but what does that mean this decade in different sectors, and what are the different specifics for a business or a financier? The more specificity there is about that direction of travel and some of the steps along the way, the more confidence that they have and the more ability that they have then to plan in an ambitious and forward-looking way. We talk a lot about the ambition loop and how leadership by businesses and the private sector and non-state actors across the board can help inform and inspire higher ambition action by their peers and by the governments, local and otherwise, where they are working, and then how strong, clear policies give the clarity and confidence to the market, essentially, and society as to which way they're going. And so at its core, that's what these NDCs have the opportunity to be, with more clarity and detail, and so clarity of strong, ambitious targets across the economy, and then, where possible, specificity as to what that looks like. As we talk about growing momentum in the climate movement, and there is with a lot of leadership from businesses and investors in cities and states, people are asking those businesses for clear transition plans and how are you going to achieve those targets? And investors are asking that of the businesses they work in. Businesses are asking that of their supply chains. Cities are asking that of the businesses that are in their cities. And equally, this next round of NDCs could quite helpfully have quite as much of that information as possible to help set the direction of travel. So then to the question of how and why might businesses engage. So quite obviously, businesses have significant influence in society, in the economy, and in the governmental process. And exactly what that looks like in different parts of the world, what those engagement sort of opportunities are and how it's structured looks different. And as the previous panel discussed, including in the Q&A, that needs to look different in different places to make sure that people have the information and capacity and right sort of setting to engage. But definitely across the board, there's a role for businesses, large and small, to sort of demonstrate what is possible and to bring their innovations, to bring their insights, to offer solutions, to offer partnership and collaboration to the process and in terms of the specific solutions. There's also a real opportunity to work together to do that, sometimes with others in your sector and sometimes cross-sectoral. We know we need to work on climate sort of in every corner of society and economy right now. That can be a lot to take on alone, but when working together, you can do more, including with the governmental entities. And so there's lots of ways that businesses can bring that influence and insight. I think I would say one important first step is to go ahead and take some action yourself as a business. Take that action, be clear about what you're doing with your own climate action, talk about why you're doing that, what motivates you as a business. That helps other people understand both the opportunities that you're pursuing as a business, maybe some of the risks you're managing by building resilience or reducing emissions within your own operations, and then talk about sure, the challenges along the way, but the benefits that you're seeing. Because again, that's what helps inform others, both in society, but also in governments, to understand what it is that is helpful and what the benefits are. Then it's really tactical. So what does it really mean to engage with the government? Again, that will look different in different places, but for this process of NDCs, one, it's useful to bring some suggestions on what that process should look like. Do you want a meeting? Do you want a survey? Do you want to come in for a consultation? Do you want to bring government officials out to your facilities to show them some of what you're doing? I think all of those could be useful. And so making some suggestions now about what that process would look like and what it is that you could offer. And then sharing those suggestions on the substance. And whether that's in writing or in meetings, whether that's publicly or privately, I would sort of recommend all of the above and thinking about how to do that in a space that allows for some discussion, for some collaboration, and for some questions and answers. Very importantly for businesses, I would say, is that they're consistent in that input and influence. And whether it's a big multinational business, whether it's a locally headquartered business, whether it's a smaller business in the supply chain, making sure that businesses realize they have influence through, yes, what they say to governments, but also what they do, what they are sharing in their products, what they're sharing in their commercials. There's many avenues of influence and often many offices here and there. And so making sure that everyone is internally in the company singing from the same song sheet, saying the same things, and being really consistent as the climate journey. It's changing and it's always new, and there's some complexity there. So there's work to be done inside the business to make sure people are on the same page. Lastly, I would say, do work with others. It is hard to go this alone, and there is a growing community of businesses, investors, cities, states, regions, civil society who are starting to march together on climate solutions. With the Climate Champions work, we work around the world with partners through 2 umbrella campaigns. One is called the Race to Zero, one is called the Race to Resilience. Those bring together initiatives from around the world, across sectors, across stakeholders, who are committed to high levels of ambition, to being public about those commitments, to reporting back on progress, and to working together as a community to make progress. So we welcome people to join those. We encourage people to join those. And that sort of network and benefit comes from being there. And the last one I'll mention, because it's here in the region, is just last week with the COP presidency, the SME Climate Hub, Small and Medium Enterprise Climate Hub, launched a MENA branch. And so for the first time, that means that there will be multilingual support and resources, meaning there'll be a real focus in the region on recruitment and engagement and encouragement of working, especially with some of those smaller and medium-sized enterprises. Make sure that there's tools and resources for target setting, for measuring and reporting of progress, and a forum to bring together some of that leadership. And so obviously with COP28 coming soon in the region, looking forward to really engaging with businesses to join those campaigns and to get going on their climate journeys, and then really importantly to be a part of that group that is engaging with governments, offering that input, support, insights, and collaboration over the next year and a half as NDCs are getting updated.
Thank you so much, Dan. I think there's a lot of good points I think that I want to highlight. The element of clarity for businesses, importance of the granularity in NDCs and how that signals how the private sector should plan, because they are involved in all aspects of the policy planning up to 2030 and beyond. But also the element of, you alluded to a point where it might seem like a big task to do this. And it does say non-party stakeholders. We're trying to tackle all the elements here in this panel, but in the end, and from the previous panel as well, we've noticed it is down to that community, that company, and that city. When we go down to that level of understanding and engagement, it becomes less and less cumbersome if everybody understands their role and how they're engaging with their governments to advance this. And on that, I want to touch on the citizen point and move to Harika, who is going to provide some guidance from the World Bank on the engagement of citizens and the whole of society approach. So I want to turn to Harika. Can you hear us?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Yes, I can hear you. Thanks. So I would be happy to dive right in. But if possible, would it be okay to share my screen, or would you guys prefer to pull up the presentation?
Thanks, Harika. I believe we have your slides. If we can kindly put them up on the screen, it would be great.
Thank you. Thank you. So while the slides are being put up, allow me to start. I think what we're all hearing today is very conducive and it's very encouraging, for the participation of non-party stakeholders in the NDC planning and implementation. As a part of this initiative, the World Bank team actually prepared a citizen climate action framework for the Middle East and North Africa region. And today, I think I would just like to take the opportunity, not to so much, dive into the details of this framework, but maybe to reinforce some of the key messages that were raised in the earlier panel. But to also maybe raise a few questions for us to think about and to ponder over as we proceed. So next slide, please. So I think just to make the point here that when we talk about a whole of society approach to climate change action, I think that we as a community and that we all of us as a group need to be aware of what and how, and we need to have a little bit of clarity here. And because there is a multiplicity of actors involved, I'm also getting the sense that that's not always particularly clear. So when we say what and who, I think it's important to take into account that yes, we have various non-state actors involved. We have subnational governments, we have civil society, but we also have citizens, and very importantly, we also have the most vulnerable groups which are most impacted by climate change, which include fishing communities, which include agricultural communities, and really the most vulnerable of the vulnerable who cannot always have the opportunity to represent themselves effectively. So I think that we just need to be cognizant of that as we move forward and we think about the next round of the NDC planning and implementation. Next slide, please. Also, to make the point here that I think what you've heard today is that the transparency aspect is extremely important. Capacity building, education, and awareness raising is also important. And very hearteningly, I also noted that there was a lot of emphasis on participation. But I think, again, we as a community and as a group of practitioners, also need to tease out a little bit, or to unpack what that participation is going to look like, depending on the context and depending on the role that each of us is playing, in this arena as a constituency. Next slide, please. So I think all of you, who are present there are far more aware of the challenges. But basically, the point over here is to say that a more systematic approach is needed, to be able to implement the engagement of citizens and to adopt a whole of society approach. Next slide. So, moving forward, I think it's important for us to think strategically and structurally about what exactly a whole of society approach to citizen climate action would entail. I think ever since I've started working on this topic, that is something which I hear quite a lot from various stakeholders, that we need to all join hands, we need to do this collectively. But what I think the World Bank team has tried to do, and which you also wanted to share for your consideration and to add to the dialogue, is what exactly would a whole of society approach would look like. And here I would like to emphasize that it would mobilize all actors and resources in collective action, which I think we all agree on. I also heard quite a lot about empowering communities and households to take direct action in the previous panel, as well as the current panel. I think it's also important to drive home the point that collective action would also empower citizens to hold governments to account for efficiency and performance on NDC planning as well as implementation. I think that the trust and accountability side is also as important as taking direct action and fostering collaborative partnerships. Next slide, please. And so here, I think when we say what do we mean, by a whole of society approach to citizen climate action, some key principles which I think would be important to abide by or to think through as we go into the next round of the NDCs is to focus citizen and civil society action on formal national processes and establish a continuous cycle of engagement. I think what we've seen from the previous NDCs is that there's a lot of emphasis, excuse me, on consultation and engagement with various stakeholder groups, including youth, and gender representatives, etc., during the planning stage, but perhaps, not so much, as, during implementation and as part of the monitoring, and that could be potentially something to think about. I think one of the other speakers also mentioned, ensuring that processes are empowering and not tokenistic. And I think, again, somebody else also mentioned earlier that the top-down and the bottom-up actions need to complement each other. Next slide, please. I think we can move to the next slide to talk a little bit about what exactly would be a whole of society approach. Yes. So here again, we want to present for your consideration, on what a whole of society approach could potentially look like as we think about a more systematic approach to non-party stakeholder engagement. So we divided this, into three pillars. The first pillar is on accountability, which focuses on the interaction between governments and citizens, and really, giving citizens and civil society the platform, to be able to hold governments accountable for their performance on the NDC implementation. And this would be at the national level as well as the subnational level. The second pillar is focusing far more on collaborative action, where citizens and civil society organizations engage in government processes, which also attest to the importance of institutionalizing such processes and having them on an ongoing basis to be able to acquire citizen feedback, inputs, and collaborative efforts to take climate change action. And the third pillar focuses on direct action, which mobilizes communities, which fosters on a continuous basis behavior change, which starts taking into account what local actors or city level or rural level actors could what actions they could take on a community-based level, on a collective level, as well as an individual level, to be able to contribute to climate change action. And at the center of it all of this hinges, upon transparency and access to information, not only on the impact of climate change, which I think all of us are very aware of at this point, but also on what are the avenues to be able to participate in climate change action, and what are some of the ways in which some sort of accountability can also be built into these processes to be able to hold various actors to account for their climate change actions. So again, I think in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail, but let me skip to the next slide, please. So here we've also tried to identify or spell out in a little bit more detail what is business as usual, in the sort of current focus on NDC implementation, and what could potentially a change or adopting a strategic framework for non-party stakeholder engagement look like. So what a whole of society approach would look like would be for global watchdogs to include countries Middle East and North Africa in their data sets, and to build collaborations with national partners to enhance national voice. There could also be options explored to focus on local monitoring initiatives to engage with youth in tracking climate co-benefits as well as performance. Next slide, please. So this slide focuses on the collaborative actions, and again, just to give you a couple of examples, we have business as usual, but then what we could also have, in terms of thinking about a whole of society approach, is for global think tanks to build collaborations with national partners in the Middle East and North Africa working on climate change action. I think very importantly at the national level, for ministries and for key government stakeholders to establish participatory policy making and planning platforms for civil society actors. Of course, supporting locally led adaptation in key sectors, including community ownership and citizen knowledge. And very importantly, adopting whole of society approaches which are cognizant of the impact of climate change on the poor and the most vulnerable communities. Last slide, please. This last slide focuses on direct action, again, business as usual, and what a whole of society approach would look like. Here again, we have examples, such as where behavior change programs could be established with key sectors to have an impact on sector targets for the NDCs, and you have greater youth engagement, for instance, in green social enterprises, especially in challenging economic contexts. Let me end here. Please, if you go to the last slide, which has my contact information. I think again, a lot of information for all of you, but really, if there's one takeaway that I would like you all to have today from this intervention, is that I think all of us are very keen, and I think all of us are convinced about the importance and the relevance of adopting a whole of society approach. I think that the next step for us to make some headway on this is to just be far more coherent, strategic, and more detailed, if I can say that, on how we are actually going to do it, and what exactly we are going to do at the national level, at the sectoral level, as well, at the local level. So thank you again for the chance to make this intervention, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Harika. This was highly useful. Based on your presentation and also what we've already heard from this panel, is that these guidances kind of frame what this engagement and this mobilization of non-party stakeholder could look like, and that is the point. There are a lot of non-party stakeholder groups that sometimes do not know where to start, specifically if their government have not started to engage them, and these different elements are very useful for people to consult, to understand how they can engage. It takes different forms. In the previous panel, this was said as well. It can be a consultation, it can be involving an institutional setup, it could be doing your own homework, and it could be programs. So these set of collective guidances from the international development community is really super helpful to guide, and it's an iterative process. Good practices inform those guidances, and then those guidances make sure that the whole of society approach to implement NDCs is further advanced. Thank you so much, Harika. I would now like to give the floor to our last speaker, last but not least, Leah from UN Habitat. So we've heard from Ikle on the previous panel on some elements in engaging cities in climate action and development planning in NDCs. What is something that municipalities can go to? What could be some guidance that they can use? And what has been some best practices that you have seen in the region as well?
Thank you so much, Mary, for the question. And also, thanks to all the panelists before me. It's always tough to be the last one and then try to add to that conversation. Maybe let me just briefly share one anecdote to start with. A couple months ago, I was at a conference and somebody came, said, look, question, I'm really new to this climate space. Why do we even need cities in the NDCs, and why do we need non-party stakeholders in the NDCs? And what happened was a fantastic discussion. And what we came up with collectively, it's a tough question actually to give a really short answer to, is it gives us the opportunity to come back home and have a hook that all of these stakeholders then can use and say, but you, dear government, said in your NDC that you will build on cities, on businesses, on youth, on women to help us to achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement and tackle the climate crisis. So I thought this was, just to say we need that hook, and that's why it is so important to have so many non-party stakeholders and have these consultations and have that engagement. And also to make sure that everybody is represented in the NDCs. Because let's be honest, the climate crisis, and I feel the microphone is not working super well.
We're hearing you fine.
Yeah, you hear me fine? We cannot get there alone. The climate crisis is not one thing where just one entity can tackle it by itself. We really need a whole of society and an inclusive approach. So now to come back to your question with that little detour is, if we look at the urban content of the NDCs, and Leon already alluded to that briefly I am getting my microphone fixed. I moved too violently before, apparently. Thank you. Currently, around 2/3 of the NDCs have urban content. So I was really jealous when I saw Jasmine's slide and really impressed of the massive increase of gender equality and women in the NDCs between the revision cycles. And that's actually my inspiration for the next revision cycle, to have that same increase and also be at 95% of the NDCs with urban content. So around 2/3 right now have urban content, but not all of them have strong urban content. It's around, 47 NDCs have strong urban content, and then 76 have moderate urban content. That's not really good enough. If we consider that cities are responsible for around 70% of the emissions, but also actually are responsible for 80% of the GDP. So lots of the money is sitting in cities, and lots of the emissions are sitting in cities. So we need to get cities to be a strong partner to help us tackle the climate crisis and bring them to that entire conversation. And to share some examples from this region, like Leon, I had a look at what at the recent publications. UN Habitat published a report with an analysis of the urban content of the NDCs earlier this year, where this data that I just shared comes from. And some examples of strong urban content is Bahrain, it's Jordan, it's Lebanon, and it's also Saudi Arabia. So there's more examples from the region, but just to give you 4 right now. And then to maybe share one other thing that I thought was really surprising, and that also comes from that same report, is actually hazards at the local level, at the urban level. Very few NDCs talk about the impacts of climate change and the hazards that the cities are experiencing. And if we're seeing what's happening in the news, we've seen the floods, we see the flash floods, we see the droughts. I think somebody before talked about the urban heat effect, that cities are up to 10 degrees hotter than their rural surroundings. And of course also the sea level rise that will hit our cities, because 90% of cities are along coastlines or water bodies. So these are really impacts of climate change that are cities are already experiencing. And to throw in another number, 70% of cities are already feeling the impact of climate change today. So, and we can see that that number will increase as the impacts of climate change are, of course, also expected to increase. So what are some recommendations? First of all, engage a wide range of stakeholders in your NDC planning. I liked what Haya said in the beginning, that youth was invited to the kitchen in the UAE. We need to make sure that this kitchen is big enough to invite a lot of different stakeholders. There is a saying, too many cooks in the kitchen, but in the end, we all need to eat the same soup. Huh? Climate change is impacting all of us, so we need to make sure that we have all of these stakeholders in the kitchen, all levels of governments, but also, of course, other non-party stakeholders, that it's a transparent, fair process, that it's not only a process that's a one-off thing, but a process that continues in the different revision cycles, that has different stop points of saying, okay, this is where we are, this is where we need to be. And then as a second big recommendation is, look what your cities are already doing in your country. Many local governments are much more ambitious than their national governments. And it's not to play levels of governments against each other. It's saying there's an opportunity that we can build on to collectively help us tackle the climate crisis. So see what are existing policies, what are existing action plans, targets, and then see how you can build on that to help integrate all of this in the NDCs. And then as a last thing, and we've talked about this already a little bit before, local governments can do a lot of things, and they've already done a lot of things, but often they lack the technical or the human resources to get it done. Innovations are often not reaching the local level, and the big thing is money. And I'm happy that we have somebody from the bank here, from the World Bank. So this is a message that needs to be heard really loud and clear by everybody, is local governments can do a lot of things, but only 10% of the finance needs actually reach the local governments right now. So we need to find mechanisms to get more money to the local level and build on them to accelerate urban climate change mitigation, adaptation in an integrated manner to really build that urban resilience and really build sustainable, healthy, and better places to live. Most of us live in cities, so we can really, we know what it feels like to live in a green city, and if we can have that vision in our heads, that can really help us to get there. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Leah. In this process, we always somehow go into a metaphor discussion, and now we have a kitchen with tools and different people in it and how big it is. So I think it's a very nice way to portray this process. And again, I love the point that you made on adaptation and disasters and understanding the impacts of cities. I believe the large majority of NDCs from the region include a large adaptation component. And disaster risk is starting to being mainstream and elevated to the levels of NDC to really signal to the world that this is a huge priority. So it's easy in different discussions, in different events, in different documents to silo all of these elements, but in the end, it's a very integrated approach. And capacity to be that integrated and to be that comprehensive is needed. It's not easy to plan this out over the different non-party stakeholders and the different documents and the different policies that need to be designed. The point of this panel really is to be very forward-looking. So you have given us really examples from the region, different recommendations, different priorities, have gone through some challenges. And I believe what we want to leave this panel or this event with is there are guidances out there, there are initiatives out there, there are examples out there. The world is not where it was 10 years ago. Non-party stakeholders are much more, have their capacities more built, no matter where they are. And this is a region which has started to feel that across the different elements. So the international development community is looking at this and is providing conduits and avenues to guide the different non-party stakeholder groups to find where they can to go where they can find something they can use. If they can go to their governments, but also be more informed themselves. This is no longer a top-down approach. This is an everybody needs to do their homework approach, which is really great. So before closing, I do want to give the floor to each one of you again, maybe some reflections from the whole event, and what would you leave participants here and online with, maybe what to do till COP, and maybe what to do till next round of NDCs specifically. I can start with Jasmine, if you are still with us. Mm-hmm. Jasmine, can you hear us? Okay, maybe some technical difficulties there. Jen, please, over to you.
Sure, thanks. Well, thanks for having me on the panel, and really appreciate the other panelists' comments as well. I mean, I think looking forward, the things I would say, and mentioning some resources, I think whether you're a city, a business, large or small, my encouragement would be to take action, set a bold target, begin working on it, be vocal about what it is that you're doing, report back on that progress, and reach out to your peers and your government and start to have this conversation. The sooner the better, because now is the time to think about how to shape that engagement, and then use the time ahead to to actually then do that engagement and dive in on different topics, including across multi-stakeholders. Would encourage across all of these topics in terms of resources. There's the Cities Race to Zero, there's the Cities Race to Resilience. Many of the cities you're talking about are in those campaigns, and as you said, therefore, often reducing emissions faster than the areas around them, providing that example and inspiration for what others can do. Same on the business side. The MENA Small and Medium Enterprise Climate Hub is up and running, so we welcome people to check that out. The broader Race to Zero is available for people anywhere. There's a handbook as part of Race to Zero with respect to persuasion that actually lays out some both content and some of the tactical recommendations for non-state actors of all types, including businesses, but others, to think about how to engage and how to start to pull together some of their own thoughts on what would be best to see in there. So welcome everybody to check out those resources. And again, really hope to see a lot of this leadership and enthusiasm and insights on stage in Dubai at COP28 quite soon.
Great, thank you, Jen. Before handing over to Harika, we will show a QR code on the screen with all the guidances that have been mentioned during this last panel, which you can all access, which is useful. So I would like now to give the floor to Harika while people are scanning this QR code. Harika, can you hear us for a last key message?
I'm going to move out of the way of the QR code.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you so much again for for all of the participants. Great insights, and for having this opportunity. I think that there are a couple of takeaways that I would like to recommend. In terms of forward-looking next steps. I think that the first one in the lead up to COP28 is to really take a serious look at what are some of the good practices out there, especially in the MENA region when it comes to non-party stakeholder engagement. I think not only does looking at other examples and pilots and other successful initiatives serve as a blueprint, but honestly, I mean, given the complex and the multifaceted nature of this challenge that we are dealing with, I think all of us around the table need a boost, and I think it's important to cheer each other on and to learn from each other. But again, do it in a systematic way where then we can apply similar principles and apply similar blueprints to the context that we are working in terms of our specific constituencies. And I think post COP28. As I think was mentioned earlier, it is important to continue to work with our governments, on the NDC planning and implementation. But I would urge that we think about this in a very strategic way, where there is an actual plan to be able to do this. So, for the planning of the NDCs and for the implementation of the NDCs, there should be an overall plan for a whole of society approach. And there should be, to the extent possible, sectoral plans to be able to achieve this as well. Including national adaptation plans, including plans which focus on specific sectors such as health or education. I think without this kind of top-down systematic approach, it is going to be difficult to harness the whole of society to be able to make some impact. And then, of course, in parallel, continue with our collaborative and direct action efforts, but also to the extent possible not make them ad hoc, and maybe try and pitch in more or to the extent possible in climate change networks and multi-stakeholder platforms and multi-stakeholder climate change networks, where again we can bring different types of skills and knowledge and resources to the table. And to be able to mobilize collectively as different stakeholders to achieve climate targets. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Harika. Thanks a lot for this. I understand Jasmine is back on. Jasmine, if you can give one quick key message reflecting on the discussion here.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me now. I wanted to say as a last message that we need more women's leadership and support women's participation and decision-making from women's and on-the-ground grassroots organizations. And what we've seen is that when we involve women in NDC processes, they become more inclusive. So really, we cannot achieve any long-term climate solution without pushing for gender equality and women's empowerment and leadership. And yes, and also UNDP has developed some specific knowledge products and tools on how to better engage non-party stakeholders and also women's groups. So I believe this list has already been shared. So yeah, that's all from my side. And thank you so much again for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Thank you, Jasmine. And last but not least, Leah, your concluding remarks.
Thank you. Let me stay with the kitchen comparison because I think it's also lunchtime. Maybe that's where the inspiration comes from. 4 points. 1, build a big enough kitchen so everybody has space. 2, see the many cooks as an opportunity to get the job done. And really, I mean, you need many cooks to cook a large meal, so see that as an opportunity to get the job done. I do want to say that last year at COP27, UN Habitat with ICLEI and the COP27 presidency launched an initiative, the Surge Initiative, as an opportunity to have many cooks in the kitchen and to really see and think about how to have that conversation between, and that narrative between local, national, and global discourse. Then 3, third point, make sure that you invite all stakeholders back to your kitchen and have that transparent process, have that feedback process. And then the 4th point, a big global kitchen event is of course coming up. That's COP28. So I do want to say we have a ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change coming up that's co-hosted by the COP28 presidency, UN Habitat, and the UN Climate Change champions. So really excited about that event. What we will be discussing there is we need cities to help achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement, and what do we need to do in order to get money and to the local level. So looking forward to seeing all of you in Dubai there.
That's very promising. Thank you so much, Leah. I would like to give the last speaking opportunity to Rafif to give us some inspiration in closing this whole event and sharing your wisdom. I just want to also say to Leah, very happy that this is going to the highest level in terms of non-party stakeholder engagement in climate action and getting a lot of visibility at COP, so this is very encouraging. Over to you, Rafif.
Hello. Hello?
Maybe not. Ah, there we go. Okay. Well, first, I don't think I can say anything more than what the panelists and all the speakers have said. One of the things that kept coming to mind was blueprint, and Harika already mentioned it. I think what's very important, what we've heard today is from people on the ground or in the kitchen, that there's a blueprint for how we can move forward. There's a clear direction where we need to go, and I think it'd be just important to kind of highlight those again and go over the tools that I think they've given today that many of us can employ going forward. And I encourage everyone to scan the QR code. But I think it became clear how important networking is, and I think this event kind of demonstrates that everyone needs to be discussing this. This needs to be discussed not only at the national level, but in the local communities. So beyond just our conferences, how do we get the discussion going? And it's great to see youth are doing it, reaching out through different angles and segments in society. But what's really important also is that we have to institutionalize this dialogue, that this can't be just a token or just inviting people for participation to say that it's been done. And we've seen examples how with each iteration of the NDCs, more is being included, more voices are being included, whether it's through the community, through youth, through gender, but there's still a ways to go. That's clearly obvious that, as was highlighted, cities still have a big role to play, and also it's not consistent across all our region within MENA, and also not across all the cities. We heard from first, let's say, leading cities to secondary cities, but also across the different countries. So some have already taken quite a bit of initiative, and that's been highlighted today. So I encourage the other countries to get involved in the discussion and see what we can learn from each other. One of the main points that kept coming out is clearly information's important, and that's why the work that's been each community has been doing is key to taking this forward, but we need more on data, more on whether it's disaggregated by gender, by youth, by understanding the private sector more, understanding the financing institutions, because they play a big role, and even the role of the MDBs. So we need more analysis to kind of inform our discussion. And I think what's become quite clear, and I think everyone has highlighted how important stakeholder mapping is, or everyone calls it by their own term, but really kind of understanding all the different segments of society and how they can be involved. And a number of tools have been shared with us, whether it's through awareness building or forums that can be done at the community level, online, with universities. But basically, it's also important to tailor it to the segment that you're trying to target, to ensure that you're bringing them in and it's avenues to hear from them. And it's tailored to, whether that local community, what approach best suits them to get them involved. Whether it's through the business community or, as we already mentioned, one example was at the local mosques. There's different opportunities. So let's keep that in mind. And I think, as Harika said, let's ensure that this is a blueprint. This isn't just recommendations, but how do we institutionalize and ensure that this is a system that's put in place for the NDCs going forward. And I think all the panelists here are already driving that initiative forward and looking forward to having this discussion elevated at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafif. I want to invite everyone to applaud our excellent panel and event. So thank you so much, everyone.